There's a certain arrogance that comes with evading justice, a quiet confidence that emboldens some to go further. But imagine this: a killer who doesn't hide in the shadows, doesn't flee when the crime is done. Instead, he writes letters, letters filled with chilling details, teasing clues, and a defiance so bold it forces the world to pay attention. The words he chose weren't careless. Each phrase was crafted to provoke, to terrify, to control the narrative. And as the bodies began to stack, those letters became a cruel reminder. Someone out there was watching, planning, and daring anyone to stop him. This wasn't just a killer. It was someone playing a game, a deadly one. And the rules, they were his alone to decide. The letters weren't just messages, they were a declaration of power. Tonight we'll follow his trail, a trail of blood and ink, and by the end you'll see why what he wrote remains one of the most haunting pieces of this unsolved mystery. Letters can reveal so much about a person, their fears, desires, thoughts they'd never dare speak aloud. But these letters, these were something else entirely. They weren't written to connect, to confess, or even to explain. They were weapons. It began in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where locks were more of a suggestion than a necessity. People knew each other by name. Their children played on the streets, and the air carried a sense of calm. But calm has a way of masking what lies beneath. The first letter came after the first murder. It wasn't discovered by accident. No, it was meant to be found. A plain envelope, no return address, left somewhere it couldn't be ignored. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, but precise enough to make its message clear. The words written inside, a detailed account of the crime. Not just the kind of detail one could guess, but details only the killer could know. A chilling signature at the end confirmed it. This was no prank. This was a challenge. At first, the authorities thought it might be a one-off, a cruel joke by someone desperate for attention. But then came another letter, and another, each one taunting, mocking their failure to stop what was happening, each one more brazen than the last. Soon, the letters weren't just sent to the police. They appeared in newsrooms, addressed to reporters, almost as if the killer wanted his story told. Each note was a twisted combination of confession and performance, a glimpse into the mind of someone who wasn't just killing, but controlling how the world perceived his crimes. The media ran with it. Headlines screamed of a murderer who seemed to thrive on the chaos he created. Panic spread through the streets as people locked their doors, double-checked their windows, and looked over their shoulders more than ever before. Every letter was a reminder. He was out there, watching, always one step ahead. But there was something else about the letters. Beyond the taunts and the threats, there were clues. At least they appeared to be clues. Codes, symbols, strange references, things that didn't quite add up. The police pored over them, desperate to crack the killer's riddles. The public joined in, amateur sleuths hoping to be the one to solve the puzzle. Yet, with every new discovery came more questions. Was this a game? Or was it something far more calculated? The letters didn't just reflect the mind of a murderer. They reflected someone who wanted control. Control over the narrative. Control over the fear. Control over life and death itself. This wasn't just a crime spree. This was a performance. And the killer? He was the director, the writer, and the star. To understand the weight of these letters, you have to go back to where it all started. A small, unassuming city with little history of violence. It was the kind of place where the police were more accustomed to dealing with petty theft or noise complaints, not murder. But everything changed one cold autumn night. The first victim was discovered in the early hours of the morning. A jogger, following their usual route, stumbled across the body in an alley just a few blocks from the heart of downtown. The scene was brutal, too precise to be a random act of violence. The killer had left nothing to chance, not a single trace of evidence beyond the grotesque display of the crime itself. It was clear this wasn't an impulsive act. This was methodical. At first, the police believed it might be a crime of passion, perhaps a lover's quarrel gone horribly wrong. But before they could even piece together a working theory, the letter arrived. The envelope was dropped off directly at the precinct's front desk. No fingerprints, no smudges, no DNA, just a plain white envelope with the words, "To the officers of Virelia," scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written in black ink, every line carefully crafted to elicit a reaction. "You found her, didn't you? I wonder, did you notice the way her hands were positioned? Did you see how her eyes were left open? That was for you. I'm watching you, just as you're watching me. Let's see how clever you are." The note was signed with a simple monogram, 2 letters that would soon become infamous across the city. For the first time, the police realized they weren't just dealing with a killer. They were dealing with someone who wanted them to know he was always 2 steps ahead. Days passed, and the city began to buzz with unease. Word of the murder and the cryptic letter leaked to the press, and while the police worked tirelessly to keep the investigation quiet, they couldn't control the rumors spreading through the community. And then it happened again. The second victim was found less than 3 weeks later, her body arranged in a way that mirrored the first crime. This time, however, the killer left something behind, a small object tucked into the victim's hand, a trinket, almost meaningless at first glance, but upon closer inspection, it was another message, a clue. The police were baffled. Why would someone so meticulous, so careful not to leave any forensic evidence, go out of their way to leave behind these messages? It wasn't until the second letter arrived that they realized they were being toyed with. This letter was different from the first. Longer, more detailed. It described the victim's final moments, almost as though the killer wanted them to feel the weight of his actions. But there was something else, another riddle buried within the text, a reference to a location that meant nothing to the investigators, but would later prove critical to understanding the pattern. The killer wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs, he was orchestrating a narrative, one that forced the police to follow his lead, whether they wanted to or not. As the letters continued to arrive, so did the bodies. Each victim was chosen with care, each scene meticulously staged, and with each letter, the killer revealed just enough to keep the police and the public on edge. The clues he left weren't just random. They were deliberate misdirections, forcing investigators to chase leads that often ended in frustration and failure. The city's residents were no longer just afraid of the murders. They were afraid of the letters. Every time one arrived, it was as though the killer was taunting them all, reminding them of their helplessness. The killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a manipulator, someone who thrived on fear, chaos, and control. But as the police worked tirelessly to decode the riddles, to find the patterns hidden within the killer's words, a darker truth began to emerge. The letters weren't just taunts. They were deeply personal. The killer seemed to know things about the city, about the people who lived there, even about the investigators themselves. It was as though he was always watching, always listening. The city was gripped by paranoia. Neighbors began to suspect one another. Whispers of conspiracy filled the air, and even the police began to wonder if the killer was closer than they realized. How could someone operate with such precision, such boldness without anyone noticing? And why did he seem to enjoy the attention so much? Everyone had questions. The problem was, the killer had all the answers, and he wasn't ready to give them up just yet. For months, the city lived in fear. Each new letter brought with it fresh terror, and every investigation seemed to end at the same place. Nowhere. The killer, whoever he was, seemed untouchable. He left no fingerprints, no DNA, no tangible evidence, only his words. But it was the fourth letter that changed everything. Unlike the others, this one wasn't sent to the police station. Instead, it was delivered directly to the home of Detective Alan Mercer, the lead investigator on the case. Imagine his shock when he opened his front door early one morning to find an envelope sitting neatly on his porch. No postmark, no address, just his name scrawled on the front in that familiar, jagged handwriting. The letter was shorter than the others, no riddles, no taunts, just a single chilling sentence. "You're closer than you think." Attached to the letter was a photograph. It showed Detective Mercer himself sitting at his desk in the precinct, completely unaware that someone had been watching him. The photo was taken from outside the building, through his office window. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was personal. The message was clear. The killer wasn't just targeting random victims. He was watching the very people trying to stop him. The realization sent shockwaves through the department. If the killer could get that close to Mercer without being noticed, what else was he capable of? But the photograph wasn't the only thing that stood out. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was a reflection in the glass. A shape, a shadow, something that could have been the killer himself. The team worked tirelessly to enhance the image, but the result was inconclusive. It could have been anyone, and that was the point. Around the same time, another body was discovered. This time, it was a young man found in the basement of an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The crime scene was like something out of a nightmare. The victim had been bound, his face covered by a mask, and beside him was another envelope. Inside, the letter was different from the previous ones. It didn't describe the murder. It didn't taunt the police. Instead, it contained a single question. Why aren't you listening? Beneath the question, a series of numbers had been scrawled in red ink. The team quickly realized it was a code, but deciphering it proved to be a monumental challenge. Was it a phone number, coordinates, a date? The possibilities were endless. As they worked to crack the code, the media caught wind of the latest developments. News outlets splashed the details across their front pages, turning the killer into a near-mythical figure. The public began calling him the Ghostwriter, a nod to his ability to operate unseen while leaving behind his haunting letters. The pressure on the police was mounting. Every time they thought they had a lead, it dissolved into nothing. The killer seemed to anticipate their every move, staying one step ahead at all times. Then came the turning point. Late one night, an anonymous tip came into the precinct. The voice on the other end of the line was quiet, trembling, as though the caller was terrified of being overheard. They claimed to have seen someone leaving the scene of the latest murder, a man in a dark coat, carrying what looked like a typewriter case. The description wasn't much, but it was the first real lead they'd had in months. The caller refused to give their name and hung up before they could be questioned further. But the detail about the typewriter case struck a chord. The killer's letters had always been typed, the font consistent, the spacing meticulous. Could this be the breakthrough they'd been waiting for? The department sprang into action, canvassing the area near the latest crime scene and interviewing anyone who might have seen something suspicious. Meanwhile, forensic analysts pored over the letters once more, searching for anything they might have missed. An impression left by the typewriter keys, a specific font that could be traced to a particular model. And then, finally, they found something. One of the letters, the very first one sent to the police, contained a faint smudge in the corner. Under magnification, it appeared to be a fragment of a fingerprint. It wasn't much, but it was enough to run through the system. The results came back within hours. The fingerprint didn't match anyone in the database, but it confirmed one crucial detail. The killer wasn't as untouchable as he wanted everyone to believe. With this new lead, the police began piecing together a profile. The killer was methodical, but he wasn't perfect. He had a pattern, one that was becoming clearer with each new crime. But just as they started to close in, the killer made his boldest move yet. A new letter arrived, this time addressed to the city's largest newspaper. It was published the very next day, its contents sending shockwaves through the community. "I know what you think you've found, but you're wrong. I'm still here, still watching. And if you don't stop, there will be consequences. Let this be your final warning." The letter ended with another riddle, one that seemed to taunt the investigators even further. And as the police scrambled to decode its meaning, another body was found. The killer wasn't slowing down. He was escalating. And now it wasn't just about the murders or the letters. It was about something far more dangerous, a battle of wits between a man who thrived on chaos and those desperate to bring him to justice. The ghostwriter wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator, a puppeteer pulling the strings of an entire city. And with every move he made, he proved one thing. He wasn't just ahead of the police. He was in control of the game itself. With every murder, every letter, the city seemed to inch closer to the breaking point. The ghostwriter wasn't just killing people, he was breaking the spirit of the investigators, the community, even the press. The fear wasn't confined to dark alleys or late-night streets anymore. It seeped into living rooms, offices, and schools. Everyone felt it. The turning point came on a stormy evening when another letter arrived, this time hand-delivered to the precinct. Surveillance cameras caught nothing. The envelope simply appeared at the front desk, much like before, as though it had been placed there by an invisible hand. The letter inside was unlike any they had seen before. "I grow tired of waiting. You're slower than I expected. Let's see if this will help you catch up." The letter contained a riddle. "I was born where the rivers meet. My name is one you'll often repeat. Find me there if you dare, but beware you'll find despair." The letter also contained a crude map drawn in ink, pointing to an industrial area near the city's docks, an abandoned warehouse surrounded by empty lots and overgrown weeds. It was the perfect location for someone like the ghostwriter. Detective Mercer and his team didn't waste a second. They knew it could be another trap, but the chance to finally catch the killer was too important to ignore. They moved quickly, organizing a team to scout the area and prepare for what they hoped would be the final confrontation. The warehouse was a hulking, decrepit structure, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. As the team entered, the air felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The only sounds were the creak of rusted metal and the soft patter of rain leaking through the roof. At first, the building appeared empty. The team moved methodically, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. And then, in the center of the main floor, they found it. A chair illuminated by a single dangling light bulb. On the chair sat another envelope, the edges of the paper curling slightly from the damp air. But this time there was something else, a tape recorder resting on the seat, its play button marked with a smudge of red ink. They pressed play. The killer's voice crackled to life, calm and measured, but with an undercurrent of menace that sent chills through the room. "Congratulations, you've made it this far. I was beginning to think you'd never catch up. But you're too late. You've always been too late. By the time you hear this, it will have already begun." The tape ended abruptly, and in the silence that followed, a realization began to take hold. The killer wasn't here. This wasn't the end. It was another beginning. Suddenly, one of the officers called out from the far side of the warehouse. They had found something else, a small trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of debris. When they opened it, they were hit with the unmistakable stench of decay. The basement was a nightmare. Lining the walls were dozens of photographs, each one depicting a victim, each one marked with a date and a time. But the most chilling discovery was at the center of the room, a table covered in notebooks, maps, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of nearly every investigator on the case. It was a detailed account of their lives, where they lived, where their children went to school, even the routes they took to work. The ghostwriter had been watching them for months, maybe even years. And then they found the timer. A small, blinking device was tucked into the corner of the room, its digital display counting down from 3 minutes. Next to it was another letter. "This is what happens when you get too close." Tick-tock. Panic set in as the team scrambled to evacuate. They barely made it out before the explosion tore through the warehouse, the shockwave knocking them off their feet as debris rained down around them. But as they regrouped outside, shaken and bruised, they realized something horrifying. The explosion wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to destroy evidence. The notebooks, the photographs, everything that could have led them to the ghostwriter was now nothing but ash. And then, in the chaos, Detective Mercer's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. But this is far from over. I'll be seeing you soon." The message was accompanied by an image, a live feed of Mercer's own home, his wife and daughter sitting in the living room, completely unaware they were being watched. The ghostwriter had made his point. He was still in control, and he wasn't done playing his game. As the night wore on, the team tried to piece together what little they had left. The killer's voice, his riddles, his detailed planning, all of it pointed to someone highly intelligent, someone who thrived on the chaos he created. But there was one question they couldn't answer. Why? What drove someone to orchestrate such a meticulous campaign of terror? What was the end game? And most importantly, how could they stop someone who always seemed to be one step ahead? By the time the sun rose the next morning, the city was a different place. The fear, the uncertainty, it had all escalated to something far more dangerous. The ghostwriter wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a symbol of everything the city had come to dread. And for Detective Mercer, it was no longer just a case. It was personal. The hunt for the ghostwriter was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. By now, the ghostwriter wasn't just a murderer. He had become something far greater, a shadow that haunted every corner of the city, a presence that lingered in the minds of everyone who dared to walk the streets after dark. The explosion at the warehouse wasn't just a setback for the investigation. It was a complete obliteration of hope. The evidence was gone, and the trail had gone cold. But for Detective Alan Mercer, giving up wasn't an option. He knew the ghostwriter wanted him to feel powerless, to feel as though every move he made was part of a grander plan he couldn't control. And for a moment, he did feel that way. But there was one thing the killer hadn't accounted for: Mercer's sheer determination. That night, Mercer returned home under the watchful gaze of the city's media and his increasingly worried family. The photographs sent to his phone, the one of his wife and daughter in their living room, had left him shaken, more so than he let anyone see. How had the killer gotten so close? What other vulnerabilities had he overlooked? Mercer spent the next few days combing through every detail of the case. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He went back to the beginning, analyzing the letters, the murders, the locations, and the timeline. The riddle from the last letter kept playing in his mind. "I was born where the rivers meet. My name is one you'll often repeat." At first, it had seemed like a reference to the city itself, a place built on the convergence of two rivers. But what if it was something more specific? Mercer began digging into historical records, old city maps, and archives. And that's when he found it. There was a small neighborhood near the rivers, one that had been abandoned decades ago after a series of industrial accidents. It was called Rivermark. The name itself wasn't particularly notable, but what caught Mercer's attention was its history. In the 1970s, a man named Edward Langston had lived there, a reclusive figure who had been accused of several crimes but was never convicted. Langston was known for his erratic behavior and his obsession with literature and wordplay. He had died in a fire that consumed his home, but rumors persisted for years that he had faked his death. Could this be the connection they had missed? Was Edward Langston somehow tied to the ghostwriter? Or worse, was he the ghostwriter? Mercer decided to investigate Rivermark himself, despite the risks. The neighborhood was nothing more than a collection of decaying structures, overrun by weeds and graffiti. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rusting metal. In the center of the neighborhood, Mercer found the ruins of Langston's old house. It was little more than a skeleton of charred wood and crumbling brick, but something about it felt off. As he walked through the remains, his flashlight caught a glint of something metallic beneath the rubble. It was a trapdoor, partially obscured by debris. Mercer pried it open to reveal a staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as he descended, and the faint hum of electricity became audible. At the bottom of the stairs, Mercer found himself in what could only be described as a hidden lair. The walls were lined with shelves of books and files, and in the center of the room sat an old typewriter, the same model that had been used to type the ghostwriter's letters. But that wasn't all. There were photographs, maps, and journals meticulously documenting every detail of the murders and the investigation. It was as though the ghostwriter had left his entire playbook behind. Mercer's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of what he had found. But just as he reached for one of the journals, the lights in the room flickered and went out. The hum of electricity was replaced by a low, mocking laugh that echoed through the darkness. And then, a voice. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place, Detective." Mercer spun around, his flashlight cutting through the dark. But there was no one there. The voice continued, calm and measured, as though the speaker were standing right beside him. "You've worked so hard to find me, but you still don't understand, do you? This was never about the murders. It was never about the letters. It was about you. Every move you've made, every choice, every sleepless night, it was all part of the story." The words sent a chill down Mercer's spine. The ghostwriter wasn't just taunting him. He was confessing to something much bigger, a game that had been in motion long before Mercer even knew it existed. The voice paused, and then, almost gently, it said, "Goodbye, Detective." The room was suddenly filled with the sound of a timer beeping. Mercer didn't wait to find out what would happen next. He ran, stumbling up the stairs and out of the house just as another explosion ripped through the structure. The blast knocked him off his feet, but he was alive. As he caught his breath, he looked back at the burning remains of the house. The ghostwriter's lair, his journals, his evidence. It was all gone. But even as the flames consumed everything, Mercer knew one thing for certain. The ghostwriter wasn't finished. Back at the precinct, Mercer shared what he had found, or rather, what he hadn't. The team was devastated. Every lead had been a dead end. Every clue had been part of a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep them chasing shadows. And then, just as they were about to call it a night, another letter arrived. It was addressed to Mercer, and it contained only 2 words. The end? To this day, the ghostwriter's identity remains a mystery. Some believe he's still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. Others think he's gone, content with the chaos he left behind. But one thing is certain, the story isn't over. The ghostwriter's game continues, and no one knows when or if it will ever truly end. What do you think? Was the ghostwriter a criminal genius, or was there something deeper at play? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to join us for more chilling stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay safe. You've now heard the chilling tale of the ghostwriter, the killer who turned his crimes into riddles, taunting the very people sworn to bring him to justice. His words still echo in the minds of those who tried to stop him, his identity a haunting enigma that remains unsolved. But this isn't just a story, it's a puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, you hold a piece of the answer. Could you decipher his riddles? Could you connect the dots? Tell us your thoughts. Who do you think the ghostwriter really was? And why did he choose to torment Detective Mercer so personally? Leave your theories in the comments below. Do you think this case was about revenge, control, or something far more unthinkable? We want to hear from you. If stories like this send shivers down your spine, don't stop here. Click on our playlist to uncover more unsolved mysteries, chilling crimes, and ghostly encounters. From infamous serial killers to the supernatural tales that defy explanation, there's always more to explore. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who dares to solve the mystery of the ghostwriter. Together, let's keep this conversation alive. Because, as we've seen tonight, the truth is often more terrifying. After all, could the ghostwriter still be out there watching us right now?